everybody, and welcome to another installment of our 3.2 Carrera Project Car. Still working on the engine again. Now, in the last video, we found out that we don't need to take the heads off. That's super duper awesome. And today, what I want to do is tackle this intake manifold. I'm just going to pretty much disassemble it. A lot of these pieces in here I'd like to get replated, just sort of as a cosmetic thing. But the throttle body and the intake manifolds and stuff, I'd like to clean them thoroughly as well. And in addition to all that, we have our fuel injectors here, and I want to pull the rails off and send all of our fuel injectors off and get them sort of refurbished. They're actually very expensive, so I think it's a much better value to just get these cleaned. All right, so what I'm going to do is just disassemble this, and I'm going to bag and tag each of the pieces. I've already taken a zillion pictures of this thing. Turned it upside down, took pictures of it, pictures from all angles that I can think of, because it's kind of a complicated little assembly, and I'm going to need to put it back exactly the way it is right here. I think we're going to start with this guy here, which I believe is the airflow metering system, and this big intake, rubber intake plenum here. Pretty simple. This stuff isn't really all that complex. With this bracket off, I think we can get our airflow meter guy off. There we go. It's a little dirty inside, not too bad. Not really bad at all, but I do want to make sure that all these parts are clean while I've got, the ability to get in here and clean all of this and just double check all the mechanisms and stuff and make sure everything's working fine. Set this guy aside. All right, we've got this bracket to get off. There, let's see if we can use that to hold it at all. There we go. All right, there we go. Next, I'll go ahead and work on this big intake, 90-degree intake plenum-y, rubbery guy here. There's a clamp down here on the bottom. There we go. And then there's also one up here at the top. This one just has a screw up here. We can go ahead and loosen up this guy. Now this tube, I believe, will just pull out. It's not really clamped on very tightly, and I believe it'll just sort of pull out. There we go, like that. Looking inside this guy, it's kind of oily in there, huh? But what we're most interested in is, what is the state of this rubber? Do we see any cracks? It's a little old. Obviously, it's an original part here. So checking around on this, it looks like somebody may have put a screwdriver in that end right there at some point in this thing's life. Just sort of took a little chunk out of it. That's the only damage I really see around the edge. It looks pretty good, actually. I would almost expect to see some cracking and splitting in different places, but it looks pretty good to me. Checking the other end, it looks about the same. And it still feels relatively soft, so it doesn't feel all hard and crunchy, which would be really bad. I imagine it's kind of an expensive part to have to replace. But it looks pretty good to me, so I think we can just clean this and we'll be set to put this back on, back when we reassemble the engine. All these clamps and things around here are the sorts of things that I want to send off to the plater and get them replated. Some of them look pretty good, and then some of them not so good, but it'd be great if they were all bright and shiny. I think it would look awesome. In fact, I think I want to take a couple quick photos of this, just so I remember which clamp goes where, because this one's a little bit different. And on these parts, you'll almost always find a part number. So this one is 930.110.356.02. That's nice, 930 and ends in 356. How cool is that? Always a good idea, I think, to take a photo of the actual part number if you've got it, just in case something horrible happens and you lose parts. Anything could happen, right? You send stuff off, it doesn't come back, or who knows what, the dog eats it or something. At least you'll have a part number from it, and that'd be super helpful too. And then also I'd like to take kind of some photos of the initial state of it. What did it look like when I took it off? Because once I clean it, I'll be removing all evidence of anything that was wrong. So if somebody said, well, what did the intake look like? Well, it was a little bit oily. It wasn't too bad. How oily? Well, you can show them the photo and say, it looked like this when I took it off. And they're like, oh, yeah, that's no problem at all. Or, gosh, that's kind of a lot of oil. So good things to know. Next, let's go ahead and tackle our enrichment device here. Now, I've had this off before. I did a video on how to pull this guy and clean it carefully. And in my case, it wasn't working at all. It was absolutely kind of jammed. So I went ahead and cleaned it really well. But if you have any questions about this guy, check out my cold start problems or cold running problems video that I did. I'll go ahead and link it up here so you can see it. There's a clamp here, so we'll go ahead and loosen our clamp. Yep, there we go. And then there's a clamp down here. And there's a washer there. Well, this little guy here is kind of interesting. There's a little port here that you could plug a diagnostic tool into, and it really just goes back to a sensor here that was mounted in the back of the engine. I don't know if you remember, it was one of the first things we had to take off in order to put the hoop on the back of the engine so we could get it on the engine stand. So that's what this guy is for, and it's really just a diagnostic tool. This wire goes nowhere but up here, so it's not even used when the car is actually in use. It's only for diagnostic work. There we go. It's just a clamp. Okay. Off comes our bracket, no washers behind it. These guys, I think, are going to stay put. Now we have a few more brackets here, this one, and this one over here. And they're star drives, look at that. They're a little bit different. Kind of interesting, huh? So we'll go ahead and pull those brackets off, plus our spring there. Before I take this bracket off, it just basically holds this connector here. This is a wire that goes back down here to the idle rest position little micro sensor down there. So it's a little micro switch there. So this wire here coming back here, take a look at the little mounts for this thing. It's actually a little bit loose, but they've been basically sort of, I think just with a pair of pliers, just sort of crimped on. So I'm going to pull them up so I can get this guy off the bracket first, and then I'll go ahead and disconnect it here at this star drive. Alright, so that guy's off, yay. There's that guy. This bracket is actually for the cruise control, I think. It does have the return spring for the throttle body as well, but it really is mostly this little bit up here, I think, is really for the cruise control, which this car doesn't have. Gives us an opportunity to feel just how this throttle body is working. Does it feel smooth? Does it feel like it's binding anywhere? It actually feels pretty good. And then we can also get a look into the intake as well down there. It's a little dirty, but it's not horrible, but it's a little dirty. Kind of expected that with the oil we saw in the big rubber bellows above it. I want to go ahead and pull the actual throttle body off next. It's a 5mm hex. I'm really getting a lot of usage out of these extended hexes on this car. There we go. There we go. There we go. Now these cap bolts have sort of a special washer. They're kind of rounded a little bit on the top, and I can easily see that when I was if I'm putting this back together and all the parts have been in a bag forever, I might not actually catch that. So I'm going to kind of stage a little photo here so I can tell just how this is supposed to go in. I can take a good look at it and go, oh, this is that, oh, that's right, that's that special washer. Maybe get one more picture of how these hoses are sort of set up. It's a little complicated back here. There we go. I didn't realize that our little triangle, I thought that thing was hooked up lower actually, but they're actually all part of the same throttle body. So I'll need to disconnect that little triangle there. Okay, we'll pull that guy off. There we go. And our throttle body here. Yay! Looks pretty good. Rubber seal here that we can see. Probably want to replace that. Just be on the safe side. It looks pretty flat. So that will add to our notes. Oh, and speaking of that, I am keeping a running set of notes of everything I see that I think I'm going to want to replace, or I don't know, anything that sort of hits me. If we had found some problems with this guy, some really bad cracking around the edges, I would have added it to my list. So what I'm going to add here is the round red gasket that we have on our throttle body, because I think I'm definitely going to want to replace that. Before I spin this guy around and work on the other side a bit, I want to take these fuel lines off, the ones that go into the fuel rails here. They're pretty big, 19mm on this side, but then there's also sort of a catch nut, I suppose, that we can use to sort of steady this so we don't twist or damage our fuel rail at all. There we go. Same story over here on the other side. Yep, there we go. We also have a little bracket here we need to take off. I'm going to pull the vacuum lines off the regulators for the fuel rails just to get them out of the way. They're a little fragile, these plastic things, and this Y connector here. So something to note, I added this little clamp on here because when I was looking at the car a while back, about a year ago, when I was having sort of idle and kind of weird problems, this tube had actually pulled out of this connector. A lot of this stuff is just sort of sitting in there with no real clamps of any kind, so that's kind of a thing. And then this one itself, also same way. It's just sort of loose on here. So you might want to think about putting some of these guys are great. You can just sort of, you know, press them together and they'll hold these guys pretty well. And something else I'm seeing on this is a bit of oil on this. And that seems kind of funny to me. I wonder, I'm gonna have to take a look at this fuel rail regulator here on this back side here with all this mess is, because it just kind of looks a little bit schmutzy to me, and I'm not real super psyched about that sort of oily stuff that's in there. I don't know why there'd be oil in there. It probably would be gas. And if it's gas and it's leaking, yeah, that's gonna cause a lot of weird problems. So we'll go ahead and take a good, careful look at this guy. And that looks kind of strange to me. Why is there a bunch of fluid there? Just seems kind of strange. I think we're gonna need to take a closer look at this guy here. I mean, if I have any questions at all, I should probably replace it. And of course, all of these fuel lines. I think I'd like to get some of our electrical wiring here sort of disconnected. There's quite a few connections. It's kind of connected to the fuel rails here. I want to try and separate them a bit. Little wire clamp here. Something I want to say about working with these old wiring harnesses is, you know, they've been heat cycled too. They've been hot, they've been cold, they've been hot and they've been cold like a zillion times. So the wiring inside here gets a bit brittle. So just treat it like it's kind of a bit brittle. You really don't want these things to break. So just be kind of careful with them. Don't wrench them back and forth. You could easily snap the copper inside. While we're at it, why don't we go ahead and pull the wiring connectors off of the injectors themselves. I think that's just going to save us some hassle. These connectors can be a little weird to get off. There's a little wire that goes around. See that there? That wire sitting there? Want to pop that guy up like that and get it kind of up and out of the way. And same sort of deal, if we rotate it up a bit like this, it pops off the other side and you can work the connector off and kind of see what we're looking at there. And then we can put our little wire back on just like that, and then it's all set for the next time we push it on. Obviously we're gonna have to clean these connectors. They're pretty dirty, but we'll be very careful with this, but I do want to clean all 6 of these connectors and make sure that this looks pretty clean actually. The other connector, this is where it actually plugs into the car. Looks pretty good to me though. Look for any damage in these boots, but you know, for a car that was built in 1986, boy, look at the rubber on these things. They just look great. They really look awesome. And this is an air-cooled car, so that engine bay really does change in temperature quite a bit, and it can get pretty warm back there. So it's amazing the materials back in 1986 that are holding up this well. It's really something, huh? Well, we still have the fuel regulator valve here attached to its bracket and firmly supported here. I want to go ahead and loosen up the 2 fuel lines on each side. I think it's going to make things easier. There we go. Okay, and we'll pull our bracket loose here. There we go. Well, this assembly here, this fuel line here is actually, you'd be surprised. This fuel line from Porsche, you can still get it, is, I think last one I saw was $160 just for this connection from here to here. It's not leaking, it looks good, it's not cracked, but that's a great place to have a leak actually, in the back of the engine where you'd never see it, because it sits all the way in the back in the far left back corner there. Actually the forward part of the engine, but if you're in the engine bay, it feels like it's in the back of the engine. And holy cow, if that thing ever let loose and broke, my oh my. it would be a very bad day. So I'll have to replace that. We're gonna have to have a little talk about the fuel lines on this car and see what we're gonna do. There's places that will remanufacture these things for you and replace the rubber and re-swage on new connectors. I've heard positives and negatives about that. I've heard that that can be great and that cannot be great. And then I took a look because there's a lot of metal lines on this as well. So the rest of this fuel line looks like this. And Porsche wants 300 and something, $350, $400 or something for this bit here. That's a lot of money for a fuel line, huh? Now these are nice connections, they spin, it's got these connectors on the end, everything is exactly the right length, everything's all happy, but cheapers, that's a lot of money for a fuel line. So we'll have to figure out what we're gonna do about this. But it just doesn't feel right to put this stuff back on the car. I mean, it's not leaking, but it's only not leaking because we're just lucky at this point. These are very old fuel lines. Looking for any type of corrosion or anything, maybe here, wherever these were brazed together, you just wanna make sure that all of those connections look good, or any, like where they bent it maybe, if the metal got a little stressed or whatever, but I mean, they look great. And the car wasn't leaking any gas, so, but this is something we're gonna have to get sorted. I wanna separate the regulator on this side as well, so let's go ahead and pop these guys loose. Notice these just aren't that tight, and they're not supposed to be that tight. If you over crimp these things and over whale on these things torque-wise, you'll actually cause them to leak. They've got swaged fittings in here, and if you really just push on them, you'll deform the edges in which you're supposed to seal, and that will cause them to splay, and then they'll leak. So there's a specific torque value for these guys for a reason, and they won't leak at all if they're put on with the right torque value. And our nice little bracket, another piece of plastic, nylon plastic. It was sitting in the back of the engine forever and being heat soaked a zillion times, and it's in great shape. It looks good. You'd expect this flange to break off or something, or maybe something down here. It looks great. Or maybe this one back here, but it looks good. And our third fuel line. So I think we have three fuel lines. You know, it looks great. It's not super flexible, pretty flexible, but it almost feels like if I went wonka, 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 yeah, I'd probably hear some cracking in it. So definitely a bit old. Now this one, see, it's nice and dry in the center there, where the other one was a little schmutzy. So this one's probably okay. With our fuel lines and regulator off, what we're gonna tackle next is this spray bar. So it's all that's really holding the injectors in. There's a couple of 10mm bolts. We'll pull those guys out and then carefully work this guy out, and all of our injectors on this side will be free. Okay, so we just carefully work this guy up. We can see how it's wobbling back and forth. We are loose at this point. Go ahead and pull this up carefully. There's a little metal clip here, this little square clip at the top. I think I'm going to take those guys off. I think they just pull off like that. There we go. I do think they're really on there, huh? There we go. Okay, there goes the rail. So now we have the rail off. That's great. Now, each of these injectors should just sort of pull out. I feel they're just on rubber washers, but boy, they feel a little not super great anymore. The rubber on the top feels pretty good though. Well, I wiggled quite a bit and I was able to pull this one out. The washers are really dry on it, so that's why I'm having so much trouble. Just didn't want to put too much pressure on these things because they're pretty expensive to replace. All right, well, my next idea is maybe just using a little bit of silicone spray just to get this lubricated just a smidge, just a bit to help coax it out. All right, see if that works at all. Yeah, well, that worked. Okay, so that's the hot setup, is just to use a little bit of silicone just to get that washer to move. It's just really tight in there. Work it around a little bit, and maybe. There we go. Well, that worked pretty well on the other side. Let's go ahead and do the same thing on this side. Pull this rail and get our injectors out. I don't think these guys were leaking at all, but the big question is just how clean are they? This will be something we'll send off. I think I have a place that will work great for our fuel injectors. Send them off, they'll go ahead and flow test them before and then flow test them after and get a whole new set of washers for them, and I think we'll be all set. Right away I'm going to go ahead and put them in a bag. There we go. Well, we're almost there. We've got one more hose clamp up here to take this whole contraption off. This bracket here is sitting, it was actually part of the big fan that was up here for the heater. It's one of the very first things we took off before we even took the engine out of the car. So, and it's just loose, so I can just take this guy off really easy. It's just sitting on here. Loosen up our clamp up here on the top. Now I do want to be very careful with this. A lot of plastic parts in here, all sorts of bad things could happen. There's our clip. It's completely loose. We'll move it out of the way. Now this whole assembly here has a couple of functions, but mainly this line out here goes for the brake booster. Just want to coax it out carefully. There we go. Okay. This thing is just kind of nutty, huh? I'm not going to do much with it. I'm just going to clean it, really. A lot of these connectors these connections here on these hose connectors are not really serviceable. They don't look that bad. This sits in the back of the engine. You almost never see it, or actually the very forward part of the engine. This here, though, this bit here with this rubber, you want to make sure all around that this isn't cracked at all in here. This one looks great. There's no leaks at all. Looks awesome, actually. This bottom piece here is plastic and it seems solid. It looks like almost a little of Venturi action going down in the smaller line here. More plasticky bits. Yikes, huh? Yeah, they look pretty scary, but that's why I'm just gonna be careful with it, clean it up, and it'll go back on the car. We have a couple of springs left over. They've been under here for a bit. We'll go ahead and take those guys off. Well, you know, I think that's pretty much about it. I think I do want to separate these two pieces. They'll be a lot easier to clean. So that's just a couple of screws up here and a couple of clamps. I think these two bits will come apart. There we go. Pull this guy off. All right, yay. Pull our clips off here. These clamps are pretty visible. The inside of them looks really good. Yes, that's what they should look like when they're original. But the outside looks kind of crappy, so they'll go off to the plater as well. So another great place for an air leak would be this coupler between the two halves of the intake manifold. And look at that oil that's in there. So we'll definitely clean this stuff up a bit. But the rubber itself looks great. It really does. I don't see any problems with it. It doesn't seem to be a problem anywhere. But it looks great. Well, there it is. There's all of our bits taken off. Our complete intake manifold completely taken apart. But I'm gonna have to clean everything. We're gonna send the injectors off to get them cleaned as well. And then I'll go ahead and reassemble this whole thing after, of course, we get all of our plating done as well. So we've got all that to do as well, with all the nuts and bolts and things. So this was quite the thing, huh? This was a pretty interesting little assembly, I think. It's pretty cool. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. If you had any questions or comments, go ahead and leave them down below. If you like my t-shirt here, it says I am the warranty. This came from Tavares, so go to his site. I'll go ahead and link that up here so you can see it. And Tavares is, if you don't know Tavares, he is a builder and he puts together cars and stuff and has all these projects and all this really interesting stuff. You owe it to yourself to go check his channel out. He's a really cool, really nice guy and very talented, does a lot of cool stuff. All right, well, thank you so much for watching, and as always, a special thank you to our Patreon supporters. And if you like what you see and you're having a good time and you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and subscribe, hit the little bell next to it to get notified, so next time we upload a video, you'll be notified. We've got a lot more work to do. Obviously, we've got more stuff to pull apart, more stuff to put together. This is gonna be great fun. Again, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, safe travels. Bye.